What is up, Pitt fans? Welcome to another edition of the PG Pitt Show, brought to you by FanDuel. I'm Stephen Thompson. That's Abby Schnable. Excuse me. We cover Pitt athletics for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And Abby, we're still kind of picking up the pieces from Saturday, aren't we? Ugly loss for the Pitt Panthers. Killed really a lot of, maybe you can't say killed. They lost to a good team, and a lot of people expected them to lose to that team and maybe even lose the way they did. But, I guess internally and among the fan base, there was a lot more excitement. There was a lot more belief that that team could compete, and you can call it looking through rose-colored glasses, but doesn't make it any easier coming out on the other side of it if you were a Pitt fan or a player or a coach that you got really manhandled by Notre Dame the way you did.
Yeah, I think there would have been a lot more. It would have been a lot less sad for the fans had it not been a complete blowout. I mean, even that last touchdown that they snuck in didn't really stop any of the bleeding that had already occurred. So I think that was probably the most disappointing part. I think there were a lot of Pitt fans who thought that they could win, but were probably still leaning Notre Dame, but thought it would be competitive. And it was a little unfortunate that it wasn't competitive because it makes you worried, maybe not worried, but a little apprehensive heading into these last two games of the season, because if they're getting walloped by Notre Dame, what's to say they're not going to get walloped by Georgia Tech or Miami?
Right. And, Georgia Tech and Miami, I think, even though Miami has that win over Notre Dame, I think those are two teams heading in kind of opposite directions. You can say the same about Georgia Tech, who really hasn't been dominant all season. But, those teams are better than Stanford. They're better than Boston College. They're better than well, I guess you can't say Georgia Tech's better than NC State because they lost to them. But, I think, Pitt's maybe – yeah, I agree with you. I think everyone kind of assumed they were going to be in a better position to compete, largely because they were getting healthier, and they did get healthier in a lot of ways. But it seems like based on who played and who didn't, and what we heard from Pat Narduzzi today to kick off Georgia Tech week, that Pitt maybe wasn't as healthy as we were kind of led to believe throughout the week.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it when your top member of the secondary and Mr. Bruce Brookins is out. That's a huge piece, especially against an offense like Notre Dame, who, while typically run heavy, can throw the ball. And it's going to be even more dangerous if he's out of the mix for Georgia Tech, because that's a very two-headed monster of an offense. So there's that piece. But then there's also, Jeff Persi got some snaps, but didn't play significant minutes because Pat Narduzzi said today that he's not 100%. Then you also looked at the defensive line, and Sean Fitzsimmons was out. That was in a pre-existing injury, so at least he didn't totally have to worry about that. But, in the grand scheme of things, you're thinking that Blaine Spires and probably Jaeden Moore too should have been back for this game. And they were a little bit, but you still had Isaiah Neal taking most of the reps on that side of the defensive end. So really, if we're healthier, yeah, maybe Des Reed was a little bit healthier, but after that, who was healthier? Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, Des Reed, and which are all big players for this team. But when your offensive line is struggling and you still don't have Jeff Persi back in the mix, when the secondary has been up and down all season and you don't have Bruce Brookins, it just makes you question, are they actually getting healthy, or is this just gonna, persist through these last two games of the regular season?
Moore and Spires played a combined, I think, 17 snaps. I think it was 8 and 9. Jaeden Moore played 6 against Stanford, and we're told he would get, a healthier mix in there, and he didn't. I think Isaiah Neal held it down about as best he could, but that's a guy who, as Pat Narduzzi also pointed out, was really playing with one hand, had a big cast around one of his hands, and Blaine Spires, like you said, been in and out of the lineup and kind of, just wonder what his game shape was like. And then you lose, one of your defensive tackles, part of a really deep group, but against, a player like Jeremiah Love and an offense like that with the kind of guys that they have up front, it's just tough. And like you said, yeah, we were told pretty explicitly, and we're kind of led to believe through some other channels that, yeah, this team was getting healthier, and that was one of the reasons why we all believed that they could be more competitive in this game. But, now you kind of leave, right? Is Bruce Brookins, who, dressed the past 2 weeks but didn't end up playing, how close is he really to getting back into the lineup, We mentioned Des Reed was as healthy as he's been all year, according to Pat Narduzzi, but then he gets rolled up on and his leg, comes down at an awkward angle, and he's got to leave the game under a lot of pain with some help from his teammates and trainers. And we don't see him again. So, and then there's Persi, right? Like I can't really, someone who, even if, he's healthy this week, he's probably still going to be knocking off a little bit of rust himself. So it really does, I think, create a tricky situation for Pitt. Like I said at the top, neither of Miami or Georgia Tech, I don't think they're as good as Notre Dame are, but they are better, like I said, better than Stanford and Boston College. I don't think these are teams that you can just overwhelm if you're Pitt. So, you want to get healthier, but at a certain point with 2 games left, I think you also got to kind of assume, considering that guys got to get back into game shape and everything like that, and that's going to be part of the process, shaking off some of the rust, that you are still going to see a lot of backups, and you're still going to see some of these funky formations and, funky kind of lineups that Pitt has had to roll with for the past now 6-7 weeks. So, yeah, getting healthier, but really, really, how healthier are you? And you got to take kind of everything you hear and see with a grain of salt, because you never know what's going to happen on game day.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out because, again, like you mentioned, the rust is a big part of it. To go from not playing for, and in Jeff Persi's case, essentially not playing since the Boston College game, that's going to be hard to jump back in. Des Reed has been in and out of the lineup pretty much all season. We saw him, yak on the side of the sideline at points. So like I am confident that he can handle it, but that injury also didn't look great. So who knows if you even have him in the mix. You got to hope that your defensive line is back together, even if it just means Sean Fitzsimmons is back in the mix and Isaiah Neal's still playing on the defensive end, just because that group has been pretty decently strong all season. And so if you can keep that group together, then I'm less, worried about Spires and Moore, just because, again, they're probably not game shape ready since neither of them have played significant minutes pretty much all season. Blaine Spires played a little bit at the beginning of the season, but hasn't really been a focal point. And yeah, and then you just got to hope Cruz Brookins is ready as soon as he's healthy. You got to hope that he's ready to run, because they could really use him at the secondary, because that was a noticeable issue against Notre Dame this week.
Yeah, and for these matchups specifically, like I think Brookins is more important for that Miami game where you've got some really good receivers and a quarterback who was at least decent, in Carson Beck. But this matchup, especially, like Sean Fitzsimmons is the one that I think you really need back, just because of how much Georgia Tech runs the ball. There's going to be, similar to Notre Dame, some kind of body blow effect there, I think. And you just want as many guys up front as you can, as many healthy bodies there as possible. Health is one thing that is a little bit out of the Panthers' hands, and but something that you hope can improve over this week as they get ready to travel to face Georgia Tech this weekend. But Abby, after thinking about this game, after digesting it, following the end of it on Saturday, let's talk solutions. What can Pitt maybe do over this week that helps put them in a better situation? And I guess what were really the glaring issues that needed fixing in your mind after watching them play Notre Dame?
So I think my top issue was the lack of converting on third downs. I mean, that was an issue we saw towards the beginning of the season, to the point where Eli Holstein lost his job. Now, I don't think Mason Heintschel is going to lose his job, but going 0-13 on third down conversions is the epitome of, we're not going to win this game. You can't just hope that you're converting on fourth downs and hope that you're getting these big chunk plays to get you out of that. And that's the question, is, can you fix that against these really good teams? It hasn't been an issue during the 5-game win streak, but they also weren't playing ranked opponents to the caliber that we saw Notre Dame, and then the caliber that Georgia Tech and Miami are as well. And so how do you fix those? The biggest quote that I took away from Pat Narduzzi today was, he said, in specific with third downs, when they were in third and long in situations, we've seen Mason Heintschel get out of them. But Pat Narduzzi said, whenever there were guys open, the protection wasn't good. And whenever the protection was good, guys weren't open. And there has to be some form of balance in that. Not every single time are you going to have good protection and guys open. But Mason Heintschel needs to figure out how to get out of those situations a little bit easier, even if it just means, keeping moving the sticks, even if you're just, handing the ball off to Boosie Turner or Des Reed and hoping that they get going. That's got to fix. You can't win a football game if you're not able to convert on downs like that.
Yeah, and it helps if you're able to stay out of, those 3rd and longs. I mean, I was pulling it up right now, but, Pitt's average distance to go on 3rd downs on Saturday was 9.4 yards. So it means essentially they were not even gaining a full yard on 1st and 2nd down. And we're basically just getting to 3rd and 10 almost right away. It was really, yeah, it was just tough sledding all day. And, the lack of a run game, which I think, was impacted by Jeff Persi play the whole game. I think he's probably run blockers on the team. Not having him was really tough. But the other thing is Pitt wasn't super disciplined Pitt was pretty disciplined overall. Like, they didn't commit a bunch of procedural penalties, which leads me to say, okay, some of the struggles offensively, were just because they didn't have the horses, right? Like, when you said, sometimes the protection wasn't great, but they were getting open, sometimes the receivers were getting open, but the pass protection wasn't great. Like, I think to a certain extent, Notre Dame just had some better players, right? Like, they were sticky in coverage, but they were also creating pressure, and just kind of doing whatever they wanted, essentially. That's, kind of why, to transition this a little bit, like, the offensive problems seemed really rooted in an inability to block. And, it's you take nothing away from Notre Dame, but this isn't a Notre Dame podcast, so we're not going to talk about them too much. But this offensive line just wasn't up to the task of competing with an opponent of that caliber. And, the good news is I don't think Pitt will face a defensive line that is across the board, or a front seven that is across the board that good, and Miami will come close. I mean, Reuben Bain is a game wrecker, but, at least for this week, Georgia Tech is not going to quite be Notre Dame. But look, this whole offseason was about building depth and, but also improving the starting caliber play of the starting level play of the offensive line. And I think it's been better to a point, but it just hasn't taken the step where it can kind of level up to where Pitt needs to be if they're going to compete with a team of Notre Dame's caliber. So we can, talk about paths to the playoff and, being in the national conversation all you want, but what happens when you get there? And I think we got a pretty good idea of what it is. It was just the amount of times that Mason Heintschel got hit, the amount of times that he wasn't able to kind of escape pressure and roll out and extend plays cleanly. The inability to run the ball all year has been a problem, and it's catching up to them. Mason Heintschel was a special player, like a special guy on 3rd and 4th downs earlier in the year when he first took over the starting job. But at a certain point, when you can't run the ball, when you are in 3rd and longs constantly, like that magic is going to run out for just about everyone. Doesn't really matter who the quarterback is. And so that's what I wrote on Saturday night. Like, you can't really give a proper evaluation of Mason Heintschel's day on Saturday because he was running for his life the entire time. He was getting hit constantly. Receivers were not getting open consistently. And when they did get open, they dropped passes. Like, the entire, kind of supporting cast, as I put it, was not very good, but it all starts up front, I think. And, when you have a freshman quarterback in that kind of spot, you have to be able to count on some help from the veterans, and Pitt did not really get any. And I looked to the offensive line first because it was most clearly where I think Pitt was overmatched in that game.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it gets fixed with just adding Jeff Persi into the mix either, which is unfortunate because, like you mentioned, he is one of the team's better blockers. So in theory, that should help. But how long can he stay out there when he hasn't played an entire game since in months, and genuinely in months at this point? And so, that's a concern. I'll transition a little bit here to look at the defensive end just a touch. I mean, they've played phenomenally pretty much all season until, Saturday. I won't say that they played bad because I really do think that they had a lot of bright spots, but I think there were a lot of tackles missed, and Steven has the numbers here for us a second, but I will specifically call out the amount of times that I saw Javon McIntyre miss a tackle, and ones that were like super important. Like, you had to get the Notre Dame receiver or running back or whoever it was, or at least force them out of bounds. Otherwise, they were going to get into the red zone, and it happened multiple times. And I know it just wasn't in the secondary either. You saw missed tackles from, the linebackers, which is a little bit unlike them, especially with how aggressive they are as a group. And you can't have that, especially against teams like Notre Dame, like Georgia Tech, like Miami. You have to be making your tackles, and you have to be making them on the first try.
Yeah, 15 missed tackles in total, a lot of them, partially due to volume, but from starters, guys like Rasheem Biles and Kyle Lewis and Javon McIntyre, even Kavir Baines had multiple missed tackles too. So it's just tough to win that way. And I thought Pitt actually had like a bunch of success when they were able to put Notre Dame into, like Pitt was in, obvious passing downs on third downs. When they were able to pin their ears back and play true to the system, they actually had some success, and I think they were able to upset CJ Carr and like get him uncomfortable and create some stops. But that just didn't happen consistently enough. And part of it is because you were not making tackles on first and second down to force them into those spots, right? Like Notre Dame had a much easier time converting third downs, and I'm going to pull it up right now because their average down and distance to go on third down was 7.3, but especially in that middle of the game when they took over, it was a lot of 3rd and 2s, 3rd and 5, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 6. It's manageable at the very least, if not easy, or not easy for a team that was averaging, I think, close to 6 yards a rush or something for the game. Maybe I think more than that actually. So it was just that's kind of where the game started and ended. Was Notre Dame was able to push the pile. They had the bigger athletes who were able to finish plays more consistently than Pitt was. And so, that manifests itself in a lot of ways. But yeah, the missed tackles was one place where if you're going to nitpick the defense at all, and I totally agree with you, like I think they played well enough to win, right? I think that, if they got anything from the offense, there is a ripple effect from field position and converting, catching in turnovers for touchdowns and red zone opportunities, staying on the field. That would have changed the game. And even if Pitt doesn't win, then maybe the score is closer. I really do think that the defense played well enough to win. So I'm not totally blaming them, but if there was a feasible victory for Pitt in this spot, it was, the defense tackling a little better, and especially your best players tackling a little better. And I will add that, kind of along the line of the offensive line, if another portion of this Pitt team I felt like got overwhelmed, it was the secondary as well. And CJ Carr was able to, be in more manageable situations, but also, complete some short passes that went 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 yards longer than they maybe should have because, Pitt wasn't able to wrap up and tackle and bring guys to the ground. And part of that is because Notre Dame has special athletes, right? Pitt is also maybe a little bit on the bone, I think, especially in pass coverage because, Sean Lee hasn't been one of their starters. It's Rashad Battle and Tamon Lynham and Shadarian Harrison who played most of that game. And again, I don't see everything in practice. I don't know what Sean Lee's like in meeting rooms, but I see him play on Saturdays, and I just wonder what that kid has to do in order to see more time on the field, in order to be one of the guys that Pitt's trusting the most. Because, look, like you say what you will about Rashad Battle and Lynham and their experience, I don't know how much that's necessarily translating to, plays on the field and production on the field. Like I think Sean Lee, when you put him out there, whatever you think of, his youth and maybe some of the mistakes he makes, like, I don't know. I think Rashad Battle and Tamon Lynham are making some of the same mistakes, and they're getting beat in some of the same ways. I just think Sean Lee is deserving of some more time out there, if for no other reason than he's clearly got talent and he's young. And he's someone that you should probably be investing in for the future, if nothing else. And I don't think that will mean a drop off in production for you. So I really do think that, for as much as Notre Dame had, the better players, more talent, and, they were more physical and everything like that. And I think Pitt does have athletes of its own. And I think it has, can put itself in maybe a better position, especially moving forward. When you place some good offenses, you can put some better defenders on the field more consistently. And that goes for the safeties too. Like when Cruz Brookins is back, like it really should be him and Kavir Baines. Like your starting safety group, those guys should play upwards of 75% of the available snaps, if not more, because they're that good. They've been your two best players at that position so far this year. So I think it is worth trying to get the most out of them in that sense.
Yeah, in basketball they say ride the hot hand, and I think this should be it's not scoring, but this should be a very similar thing in which you are playing your best players. And unfortunately for Tamon Lynam, Rashad Battle, and Javon McIntyre, they're getting outplayed by guys that are younger, maybe a little less experienced. And in this situation, like I'd rather have a guy out there that's going to hustle and make really, really, really try for the tackle. And I'm not saying that they're not trying, because I do believe that they're trying, but we've seen this all season with those three in particular of just falling short almost every single game. Like they've been the weakness of this defense in a way. And if you put when you put Kavir Baines Marquez out there, it's a different landscape of the secondary, or of specifically the safeties. And the combination of him and Cruz Brookins makes them even more dangerous if they're able to keep it that way. And yeah, I want more Sean Lee. I want more Shadarian Harrison, because they've been playing. They've made big plays. They've made little plays. And it's almost confusing to me why that they're not getting the playing time, even though they're outplaying them almost every single Saturday.
A lot of these issues that we're talking about, that we've talked about in this episode, just sound so similar to what we talked about after West Virginia, what we talked about Louisville. It's really kind of the same problems. Pitt falling behind on third downs and being unable to execute, giving up big plays in the passing game, not wrapping up. It's just a little, this team kind of is what it is at this point. But I do think that there are some solutions that Pitt can make, and there's some ways for them to stop kind of shooting themselves in the foot. And I think one way is also to not play Notre Dame the rest of the year. If they can avoid doing that, which it seems like they will, I think Pitt will be in much better position. I still think there's a good football team in there. I don't think necessarily that that 5-game winning streak was fool's gold. I think they just ran into a much better team. And you hit a high like that, that's the best team Pitt's probably going to play all year. And, cupcakes left on the schedule. There are good teams there. I do think that Pitt will have a better chance of competing with a teams like Georgia Tech and Miami. We'll see. Pitt is heading down to Atlanta this weekend, but there are a couple basketball games that Abby and I are going to have a hand in covering this week. Starting tonight, Pitt hosts Bucknell at the Peterson Events Center. I will be there to watch the Panthers, who are 16.5-point favorites, according to our friends at FanDuel. So I will be there to cover that one. Abby and I will have a hand in covering the UCF game later this week, and then I will be down in Atlanta to watch the Panthers take on the Yellow Jackets. We'll have it all covered here on PG Pitt on YouTube, so make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and then follow all of our written work at post-gazette.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.